Continuing with my private American citizenship course, we are now in a volume that I have titled Section 9 of Volume 1. Section 9 of Volume 1 was just too big to put in the same binder, so I got a smaller binder, 1.5 inches, actually a 2-inch binder now, I believe, and I put the exploded Section 9 of Volume 1 in this. And this concerns 12 separate sections itself. So it's your middle volume. It's generally black unless Staples runs out of black. And it's a 2-inch volume, I believe, maybe 1.5 inches. And so we shall begin covering it today in Section 1 of our middle volume, titled Section 1, Volume 9. This is a very key volume in that what happened on March 6th and March 9th of 1933 is absolutely critical to our understanding. And I've touched on it throughout the past, 18 hours? 10, 18 hours? The last 9 days is the 10th day. But we'll go into it in more detail today so that you will understand completely and totally what the Jesuits did to us on March 9th, 1933. And this was a fulfillment of what Charles Chiniquy wrote in his great work, 50 Years in the Church of Rome, when he met with priests in Urbana, Illinois, and he revealed his plot to make the United States Roman Catholic. And all the priests there coldly received what he had to say, but they said, "We, like you, have determined to reduce the United States to the Pope. And here's how we're going to do it. We're going to bring in our Irish Catholics, and we're going to settle them in the major cities of the United States. And it'll be to the place where no one will be able to be a ditch digger unless they're loyal to the Pope of Rome. And it's then that we will put the United States at the feet of the Pope of Rome, when we have turned those godless sons of the Puritan fathers away from every office of wealth and influence in the major cities." This was written in about 1851. This is before the war between the states, for which purpose that was to destroy the historic white Anglo-Saxon Protestants of the South and the North, and also the black Baptists of the South, because remember, the northern banditti took turns gang raping the black slave women of the South, which was not done by the white men of the South, generally, at all. Only the lowest white scum of the South would do such a thing, and they were strongly punished for that. So it was a war of annihilation against the white Protestant Baptist Southern people of the South, in addition to the black Baptists, because most black people are Baptists unless some white man has been messing with their religion. And then in 1851 or so it goes on that the Jesuits then purposed to make America Catholic to control all of our major cities, which they do today. The Vatican, through its Irish Roman Catholics and Italian Roman Catholics and Polish Roman Catholics, control all the banks. They control all the places of political power. They control the NFL. They control places of entertainment. They control Wall Street. They control the Securities and Exchange Commission. They control the Treasury. They control the Commander-in-Chief. They control everything. And part of their legal control by statute, is to reduce the pre-1933 private American citizen, protected by Section 1 of the 14th Amendment, to be surety, to be an accommodating party for an all-capital letter name, little corporation, little artificial entity, which by operation of law created this artificial entity on a state level when it was filed. And so therefore, by being able to legislate everything with regard to this artificial entity, they can control and legislate everything for the real man, the private citizen who's voluntarily been made surety and an accommodating party for this all-caps entity. And this follows the model of the baptismal certificate. Okay? Okay? There's nothing new under the sun, as the prophet Solomon wrote in Ecclesiastes. All right, so we go on here in section 1 of our middle volume, and the first section is titled Trading with the Enemy Act. The first page that you will see is a chart, and it shows from the bottom up, step 1, you have FDR's Proclamation 2039. It imposes emergency war powers military government without congressional approval on the 6th. It uses the Trading with the Enemy Act to impose this military government, to justify this proclamation. Quote Section 5B of the Act of October 6, 1917 as amended 14 times from 1918 to 1930. This is going to be the 15th Amendment coming up on the 9th. The 15th time it will be amended, I should say. It seizes all registered property on the state level as booty of war. This is why the all-caps entity registered on a state level is not the property of the state. It is the property of the United States. Okay? So whenever you sign your name, all caps, after you become a private citizen, you're going to sign for the all caps agent, signature, comma, agent. Underneath, just put property of the U.S. Property of the U.S. So that shows them that you know that this all caps entity is property of the U.S. And by the way, every bill to this all caps entity, if the entity is property of the United States, then every bill is an obligation of the United States. Isn't that clever? We'll get onto that a little later. So we have the Proclamation 2039. It's first put in place on the 6th, March 6, 1933. And then Congress is called for an immediate session to run to Washington, D.C., because the president now has just acted like Augustus Caesar. FDR was America's Augustus Caesar. What did Augustus do? He's the first Caesar. Julius Caesar's not the first Caesar of the Roman Empire. Julius Caesar's still over the Republic. The first Caesar of the Roman Empire is Augustus Caesar. And he changed the Republic into an empire. Octavian changed the Republic into an empire and took the name Augustus Caesar. Okay? So now, with this Trading with the Enemy Act, Congress runs to Washington, D.C. It passes the Emergency Banking Relief Act that none of the congressmen will read because it's not in print yet, except one copy. And they will approve and confirm the proclamation of the 6th. In fact, they will approve and confirm every proclamation and executive order and whatever dating from the 4th of March, namely from the day of the inauguration of FDR as president. And President FDR will be the last inaugurated president of the United States. Every president, FDR's next term, his next 3 terms, and every president thereafter will be all inaugurated on the January 20th, pursuant to the 20th Amendment. Because now the leader of the president of the Republic is now the commander-in-chief of the empire. Hence, hail to the chief every time the president's inaugurated. So, this Emergency Banking Relief Act is the font of wickedness and evil, and it must be repealed immediately by the Congress because it's this Emergency Banking Relief Act that approves and confirms Proclamation 2039. It amends the Trading with the Enemy Act, Section B, Section 5B, to now include all transactions within the United States, and therefore everybody engaging in transactions within the United States is an enemy. And if therefore everybody's an enemy, all the property of the enemy is now, ipso facto, the property of the commander-in-chief, put in trust to the Secretary of Treasury as trustee, then called the alien property custodian, but now those powers are with the Secretary of Treasury. And so the Treasury Secretary is the trustee of the property for the beneficiary, who is the commander-in-chief. The commander-in-chief is the beneficiary because he's the real owner of the property. He's the equitable owner. He holds equitable title to everything. Equitable title by characteristic, but he still is for his benefit and use. For what? To what end? To finance the military-industrial complex, so the commander-in-chief can wage wars around the world for the benefit of the Pope of Rome, crushing the nationalists and the manhood of every nation, so that the resultant people left over will be submissive and submit to the military dictator, the democracy of the government established there by the American military government, as in the case of Iraq, and all these other, in the case of Japan, post-war Japan, as in the case of post-war Germany, etc., 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 so that these nations will then be militarized, given democracy, what is then in fact communism, socialist communism, to the end that everybody will be leveled and reduced to the same status and under a Roman equity that knows no limitations in the enforcement of the power of the commander-in-chief, the dictator of the country, the commander-in-chief subject to the Pope of Rome. And that's how it works. This Emergency Banking Relief Act is the very heart of all this, and it has to go. And if the Congress doesn't repeal the Emergency Banking Relief Act, then we have to become private citizens, which we're doing now, and then declare our independence on a state level. Because we will no longer be governed by the Trading with the Enemy Act, by the Trading with the Enemy Act as amended by the Emergency Banking Relief Act. We're no longer going to be governed by that Constitution, by those statutes that have taken the place of a constitutional de jure limited government. All right, so the second step was the Emergency Banking Relief Act. It amends Trading with the Enemy Act and approves and confirms FDR's proclamations of the 6th, and then will approve the proclamation on the very same day that the Emergency Banking Relief is passed. And this proclamation is 2040. That's step 3. Proclamation 2039, step 1. Step 2, Emergency Banking Relief Act 3 days later on the 9th. Step 3, FDR's proclamation of 2040 on the same day, March 9th. And here we go, on our way. All right, that's the chart, and I suggest that you make a copy of it and hang it up on your refrigerator. We're now getting into section 1 of this volume. And notice on page 1 it says Trading with the Enemy. Act approved October 6, 1917. And who publishes this? Well, the Guarantee Trust Company of New York, 140 Broadway. Has a London office, Fifth Avenue office, and a Paris office. The Guarantee Trust Company of New York was controlled by the Jesuits through the Knights of Malta. This company was involved with Joseph P. Grace. Joseph P. Grace was a Knight of Malta. His father, W.R. Grace, was the kingpin of Peru. He became the mayor of New York City. He's the one who receives the Statue of Liberty in 1884, 1885. W.R. Grace Incorporated, that big, huge, massive corporation today out of Boca Raton, Florida. The founder was William R. Grace. His son was Joseph P. Grace, and at this time, Joseph P. Grace was a kingpin in the Guarantee Trust Company of New York. So here are the Knights of Malta putting forward the Trading with the Enemy Act. And it's in these notes that you'll, for the first time, see the term U.S. citizen. It's not in the Act, but it's in the notes. And the first 35 pages or so are notes. All right, going to the heart of the Act, because it gives a summation in the first, as I said, 38 pages. Yes. Before we get into that, there's just a little portion of the Suits and Chancery that I found by the grace of God by Henry R. Gibson, published in 1907, because you see the Trading with the Enemy Act has language of Suits and Chancery from Gibson's work in 1907. Trading with the Enemy Act is 1917, so this is 10 years after Suits in Chancery. Now notice here on page 38B, we're reading out of Suits in Chancery. The general rule as to parties complainant in a particular suit in Chancery. Any person, natural or artificial, may bring a suit in the Chancery Court except alien enemies, foreign executors, and foreign administrators. The seizure of March 9th, 1930, of March 6th, and confirmed and approved on March 9th, will make every private citizen who's been registered on a state level now a U.S. citizen and now an enemy. And when you hold this status of U.S. citizen, statutory U.S. citizen, under Trading with the Enemy Act, as amended by the Emergency Banking Relief Act, you're barred from equity. You cannot get into a court of exclusive equity on a federal level. You can only do this as a private citizen. We'll be back, continuing with Trading with the Enemy Act. You're on 24/7 World Radio after prayer. Also back with the Private American Citizenship course. We're in section 1 of our middle volume. Page 39, Trading with the Enemy Act. Approved October 6, 1917. We read, be it enacted by the Senate and House of Representatives of the United States of America in Congress assembled, that this act shall be known as the, quote, Trading with the Enemy Act, unquote. There's nothing wrong with this act. It's just fine in the context of World War I in 1917. It's okay. But they wrote it with the intent to make it applicable in a future day to all the people, inside the United States. The Jesuits always have an open but false policy. This is only for World War I. But they always have a secret but true policy. But we're going to continue this act. We're not going to have it repealed after World War I. And we're going to amend it 14 times from 1918 to 1930. And then so it's ready to go, so it's in pristine form. So when we amend it the 15th time with the Emergency Banking Relief Act on March 9th, 1933, it'll apply to everybody in the United States. And so they'll all be deemed seized property, enemies, seized property of the all caps enemy created entity on a state level that has been seized by the Commander-in-Chief. It was a brilliant, illustrious plan. And so, continuing on. And by the way, it's a plan that only the Jesuits could bring about with their various and sundry advisors in every facet of law and commerce, so that they could all get together at Georgetown University and Fordham University and wherever else they got together, in the Vatican, and Gregorian University in Rome, to hatch out this plan so that they could use the blood and treasure and the mighty economic power of historic white Protestant and Baptist America to saddle it under the rider of the Pope, to then use it to conquer the world in the 20th century. And that's exactly what happened. Conquer the world for the Pope in the 20th century. Okay, going on, page 39. It's the Trading with the Enemy Act. Section 2. That the word enemy, as used herein, shall be deemed to mean, for the purposes of such trading and of this act, A, any individual, partnership, or other body of individuals of any nationality, or any nation with which the United States is at war. And he goes on out here. Continues this long definition. B, government of any nation with which the United States is at war. C, such other individuals or body of class or class of individuals as may be native citizens or subjects of any nation with which the United States is at war, So it's all the individuals of a nation with which the United States is at war. Other than citizens of the United States. What kind of citizen was this in 1917? This citizen was a pre-1933 private American national, citizen of the United States, protected and secured, had the full protection of Section 1 of the 14th Amendment with his status described there. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. That's our King's X. That was those were the people with that status who could not be deemed enemies under Trading with the Enemy Act. So therefore, to make the Trading with the Enemy Act applicable inside the United States to everybody one day, the status of all these private American national citizens protected by Section 1 of the 14th Amendment had to be changed so that they could be deemed enemies under the Trading with the Enemy Act. Okay? That's why the birth certificate registration of property on a state level began in Pennsylvania in 1906. During the days of that damnable Theodore Roosevelt, who had a ranch in North Dakota, South Dakota, called the Knights of Malta Ranch. He was run by the Knights of Malta out of New York City. Joseph P. Grace being one of them. The father of J. Peter Grace, who was head of the Knights of Malta at the time of the Kennedy assassination on November 22nd, 1963. J. Peter Grace oversaw the assassination. He was involved in Project Paperclip. He brought thousands of Nazis into this country after the Pope had used the SS for the destruction of the Hebrew Jewish Israelites in Europe and for the destruction of the reformed peoples of the Netherlands and Denmark, and for the destruction of the Orthodox heretic Russians, quote unquote, in Russia. I mean, these were grand inquisitors, and so we had to say the Pope had to save them. So he used his American Knights and Francis Cardinal Spellman to do so. J. Peter Grace was one of them. His father, Joseph P. Grace, is a kingpin on Wall Street at the time of the Trading with the Enemy Act. You don't believe me? You get Anthony Sutton's work, Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution, and he will tell you much of Joseph P. Grace and how 120 Broad Street financed the Bolshevik Revolution. It wasn't Jacob Schiff. Blaming the Jews for the financing of the Bolshevik Revolution is nonsense. It was 120 Broad Street in New York City. That's who did it. Let's see, what is it here? Yeah, 120 Broadway. Mm-hmm. So now, again, the point is that a citizen of the United States in 1917 could not be deemed an enemy under Trading with the Enemy Act, so his status had to be altered. And it had to be altered in such a way that the private citizen did not know his status was altered, and that his status would be altered by operation of law, so that there was nothing illegal or illegal about it, nor was it fraud. You can be bound to a contract that you don't know anything about. I know that's hard for you patriots to swallow, but that's the truth. And I prove it in my course. I'll be proving it later on. You can be party to a contract by merely operation of law. You can be trustee without knowing you're trustee. And you know what? Everybody in court today will be deemed a trustee for the all-caps name under which they're being brought in a criminal matter or a civil matter. They're being deemed a trustee. And the average guy doesn't even know it. That's why one of our filings in our Declaration of Status is a disclaimer of trustee and quasi-trusteeship. We're not trustee for this all-caps property of the United States. We are separate from it. In fact, we are its beneficiary now that we're the private citizen. And the commander-in-chief is now its trustee. We have its use. The commander-in-chief has the duty to perform pursuant to our wishes because we're now one of the sovereign people of the United States. Again, we're not a sovereign, we're one of the sovereign people as a whole that instituted the Constitution. Okay? So, again, a pre-1933 private citizen of the United States here in 1917 could not be deemed an enemy. So therefore, it's a matter of a status change that we were unaware of. It's not a matter of adhesion contracts and unconscionable contracts, and so therefore we're going to undo all contracts you've ever been in. It has nothing to do with contract. It has to do with status. And it's by virtue of status that they can compel you to make these contracts. By virtue of your status as an enemy, you're not going to be driving a car down the street or traveling in your vehicle either, because you're still an enemy. It has nothing to do with your common law right to travel. You don't have one. You don't have a common law right to do anything. You have title in nothing. You own nothing. You're an enemy. All the property that you enjoy is entrusted to the commander-in-chief for the use of the Secretary of Treasury for the benefit of the commander-in-chief. That's how it is here. Secretary of Treasury is the trustee. Commander-in-chief is the beneficiary. And you, the U.S. citizen, are trustee for the commander-in-chief too. That's how you're treated when you go to court. When you see the seal of the commander-in-chief there in every federal district court. It's telling you that this is a court of the commander-in-chief. You're getting military process. And it's telling you that you are an enemy under the Trading with the Enemy Act, and you're getting a military process there out of Section 17 of the Trading with the Enemy Act. Why? Because you're an accommodating party, you're surety, you're one entity with this all-caps name, all-caps entity that was seized on March 6, 1933, approved and confirmed on the 9th, and therefore everybody in the country is presumed to be booty of the commander-in-chief. That's booty. That's property taken by an army on land. Property taken by the Navy on the sea is called prize of war. So we're deemed on the land booty of war. So that song, Shake Your Booty, isn't too far off the mark. Everybody's booty. Shake your booty, booty. Look at yourself in the mirror. I'm booty. I'm property of the commander-in-chief because I willingly volunteered to be surety for this all-caps name by a contract I didn't know anything about, but I should have known about it because I was busy watching Jackie Gleason's show or whatever those shows were. And so as I was busy watching that, it didn't take time to wonder maybe something's wrong here. Especially every April 15th, when you get to pay the booty tax. When you get to pay the Pope's crusade tax for war. All right. Notice the definition of citizen of the enemy. Can't be a citizen of the United States in 1917. He goes on now, and in this act, they start to regulate. Oh, United States. This is the next definition we want to look at. Definition of United States. The words United States, as used herein, shall be deemed to mean all land and water, continental or insular, in any way within the jurisdiction of the United States, or occupied by the military or naval forces thereof. So this is 1917. So it's all land and water, continental or insular, in any way subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. What jurisdiction of the United States is this here? It's the jurisdiction under Section 1 of the 14th Amendment, which is just fine, because that's a civilian de jure jurisdiction of the Constitution. But they're going to change the jurisdiction in 1938. They're going to change the government. It's going to be a military jurisdiction in 1933. They're going to change the judicial jurisdiction in 1938. And so the jurisdiction is going to change, and the definition of the United States is going to be the exclusion to this. After 1933, this is what the United States is. The words United States, as used herein, shall be deemed to mean all land and water, continental or insular, occupied by the military or naval forces thereof. That's what the United States is today. It's the United States under military occupation pursuant to Trading with the Enemy Act, Section 2, Paragraph C. Okay? The United States shall be deemed to mean all land and water, continental or insular, occupied by the military or naval forces thereof. That's the United States today. Do you like that? That is the United States today. So, everybody in the United States is an enemy. Post-1933, the United States is under military occupation by the Army or the Navy and Air Force. That's what we live in. And by the way, this was all rehearsed in 1917 when Woodrow Wilson, that demon-possessed, wicked, diabolical sinner, apostate Protestant, betrayer of his own country, when he signed the Federal Reserve Act into law, when he put the whole country on a war footing in 1917. Do you know the whole country was deemed to be at war for World War I? Everything would be now for the war effort? And did you know during World War I, they forbade the German people in this country, the Pennsylvania Dutch and others, from speaking German in public? I had a Mennonite lady tell me that a couple years ago. Did the same thing during World War II. Gotta hate the German people. Okay, gotta hate them. And so the whole country was a war camp. They had what was called Meatless Fridays. Can you believe it? Check it out. They had what was called Meatless Fridays, because we're not going to meet on Friday. Does that sound familiar? I think I know of another institution that does that. It's called the Roman Catholic Institution. Don't eat meat on Fridays. I grew up with a Roman Catholic friend. He didn't eat meat on Fridays. His name was Bobby Rogers. I said, well, what's wrong with you, Bobby? Oh, we're Catholic. We don't eat meat on Friday. It's Meatless Fridays. That's what Woodrow Wilson imposed on the whole country during World War I. And my question is, where are the preachers of that day? They should have said, what in the name of Jesus Christ is being done in this country, having meatless Roman Catholic Fridays? What's going on here? And furthermore, why are you calling us to go to war against the Hun when it's the Protestant Prussian Second Reich that defeated the Catholic Austrians in 1866 and defeated the Roman Catholic French in 1870? They're hated by Rome. Why would we go to war with the white, beautiful Protestant Prussian German people? We'll be back. John Phelps back with the broadcast, continuing here now in Trading with the Enemy Act. Matter of fact, I'll be reading to you tomorrow or Monday the book Trading with the Enemy Act by Charles Higham. Very important work. He mentions a Knight of Malta in there that you'll find intriguing. Okay, going on here in the Trading with the Enemy Act, the first thing they're going to do now is starts out that it shall be unlawful. It shall be unlawful under this Trading with the Enemy Act for any person in the United States, except with the license of the President, granted to such person. So they're going to be licensed. Now, this is the foundation of all licensure as we know it today. The license of the President granted to such person, or to the enemy, or ally of enemy, as provided in this act, to trade or attempt to trade either directly or indirectly with or for the benefit of any other person, with knowledge or reasonable cause to believe that such other person is an enemy. In other words, no person in the United States, apart from a license, can trade with an enemy. And if you make everybody in the United States an enemy, why then everything all the enemies do must be licensed. All trade of everybody in the country is trade carried out by enemies. That's all commerce. Trade is commerce. So now we're going to make all the commerce going on inside the country commerce carried out by enemies under Trading with the Enemy Act as of March 9, 1933, and therefore everything you do in trade, in business, in commerce can be licensed by the President of the United States or one of his conquered territories called a state, which is overseen by a military commander called a governor, and the state can issue licenses. It's the state as a conquered territory issuing licenses to everybody in the state that's deemed an enemy under Trading with the Enemy Act. Because they're licensing all the enemies, and the enemies are the all caps name, for which the private citizen is surety. Now, that license isn't issued to you, my friend. It's issued to that all caps entity, which is presumed to have a surety for it, namely you, until you rebut the presumption with evidence. You with me there? You were never given a license to do anything. The all caps was licensed. It put your picture on it as surety, and you signed it with an unqualified signature. Therefore, you're the surety. You're not the accommodating party. You're worse than that. You're the surety. You're primarily liable by way of a contract that you knew nothing about. And it's in addition to its seizure on March 6, 1933, approved on the 9th. Is this making sense to you? Just bear with me. So now, all commerce is being conducted by enemies and therefore absolutely able to be regulated by the President as Commander-in-Chief and his governors as junior Commanders-in-Chief all throughout the country so that every transaction can be monitored and reported. And the great monitoring agency for the military government is the Internal Revenue Service. So if you're surety for an enemy, that enemy owes the income tax, and you as surety are liable to make sure it's paid. That's right. Don't talk to me about a common law right to work. Don't talk to me about the Constitution. It's moot. We are under Trading with the Enemy Act, gentlemen. We have been decised of our written Constitution because we've been decised of our status by our voluntary consent through ignorance. Okay, going on. So it's unlawful concerning trade. Now the next thing they're going to deal with is going to be transportation. The first thing is we got all commerce, and now we're going to get all transportation. Transportation of enemy for any person, except with the license of the President, which authority can run down to the state level because the state governors are his commanders-in-chief. They're subject to him. That's why the President has a governor's conference at least once a year to tell his boys what to do now, boy. Because after all, you're using my military script in your state, in your conquered territory, boy. Right? You don't have any gold or silver. You don't have any state banks anymore, boy. You're using my national banks. You're using my Federal Reserve Bank. You're using my military war script. There's no gold behind it. I took all the gold because it's mine. I took all the silver, too, because it's mine, too. I took all the land in this country because it's mine too. You don't even own your own land, governor, so you're just my military governors on conquered territory that's for my use, for my benefit, as I use this entire nation, its blood and treasure, to wage war and conduct economic warfare. I was an economic hitman, blah, 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 what's his name? Can't remember. To subjugate all corporations and all businesses of all nations to my power as I'm controlled by the Holy Father in Rome. It's making you sick yet? Oh, it gets better. So it's transportation of the enemy. Now it says, for any person except with the license of the president to transport or attempt to transport into or from the United States, or for any owner, master, or other person in charge of a vessel of American registry to transport or attempt to transport from any place to any other nation with knowledge of, or reasonable cause to believe that the person transported or attempt to be transported is such subject or citizen. Subject or citizen of an enemy nation. In other words, if he's an enemy. So therefore, the enemies, if they're going to be transported, everybody doing the transportation has to be licensed. That's why they compel the all caps name for which they presume your surety. Got to get a license to drive your car, boy, because you're a surety for an enemy all caps name that the president has its use for. He's the owner of it. He controls it by way of licensor and a myriad of codes and regulations regulating the use of the license. Now, the next thing they deal with, after trade, after commerce, and transportation, they're going to deal with transmission of communications. Well, just one second. Okay, that was my lovely wife coming in the door. Spying on me, seeing if I'm really on the broadcast or not. Oh, was it? Oh, I'm sorry, dear. Left my car door open. She thought I was dead. Okay, the next thing is we have the transmission of communications. So therefore, all communications is now under licensure. Now we have the federal FCC, the Federal Communications. So therefore, everybody that's going to be broadcasting and transmitting has to have a license, except what I'm doing here on Skype. But if I had a radio station with an actual radio station that was so on and so forth, they wanted me to be licensed. Licensed. Why? Because it's trading with the Enemy Act. So what more is there if you've got all the commerce, you got all the transportation, you got all the communications? What more is there? Oh, he gets into censorship, page 42. Whenever during the present war, remember a state of national emergency is deemed to be equal with or synonymous with a state of war. We've been in a national emergency for 82 years. Whenever during the present war, the president shall deem that the public safety demands it. Ooh, how many times have we heard that? For the public safety. He may cause to be censored. Forget the First Amendment here now. That's gone. He may cause to be censored under such rules and regulations. That's called codes. As he may deem from time to time establish the Code of Federal Regulations, communications by mail, cable, radio, or other means of transmission passing between the United States and any foreign country he may from time to time specify, or which may be carried by any vessel or other means of transportation touching at any port, place, or territory of the United States and bound to or from any foreign country. Remember, every state has been deemed to be a conquered territory during this present war. And so therefore, the commander-in-chief can censor everything if he wants to. You know how he does it? He does it with the Central Intelligence Agency as it mans every major news broadcasting company in this country. Many, many correspondents are CIA affiliated, like the old wicked senator Walter Cronkite. Everybody involved with the Council on Foreign Relations is overseen by the Central Intelligence Agency. That includes Brian Williams, Tom Brokaw. And it goes to Chris Matthews, Lawrence O'Donnell, Roman Catholic Lawrence O'Donnell, Roman Catholic Chris Matthews, Roman Catholic Bill O'Reilly, Roman Catholic Sean Hannity, Roman Catholic Megyn Kelly, Roman Catholic Laura Ingraham. It goes on and on and on and on. All of them good little Roman Catholics. They're good Catholics now. Subject to that, their masters there, Rupert Murdoch being one of them, and not either equestrian order. And so they're busy serving the Pope of Rome, so they make sure they keep the news censored. And they don't really want to tell you what's going on, like the encirclement policy of China and Russia for our impending invasion of North America. They don't want to tell you that in the news. That might disturb the public peace. That would be against public policy to report anything like that. Yeah. How about the impending design to kill every Jew in North America? How about that one? Well, we can't disclose that. Why, there might be some Nazi connection to this, and we can't let the American people know that the Nazis, the high Nazis, were brought into America after World War II. We can't let them really believe that, so therefore, like they got entrenched in the CIA and other places, NSA, and so therefore, we have to keep that news down. Everything is censored under Trading with the Enemy Act in this country. And God help the man who decides to go against it, because he better know the Lord going into it, because it will probably cost him everything. So don't think for 1 minute, if you decide to do this and you become a private citizen and you want to begin to stand against this military government and Trading with the Enemy Act, you're really its friend. You just want him to acknowledge your status. Don't think it's going to be roses. Don't think it's going to make your life easier. It's going to be difficult, but you know what? God's going to give you grace, and he's going to bless you for it, doing the right thing. And if you wait on the Lord, you're going to mount up as eagle's wings, and you're going to run and not be weary. It goes on. Section 4. Insurance companies and others doing business in the U.S. Remember now, since everybody's going to be an enemy in commerce, why, they all have to be insured. And so we're going to have, for the first time, such things as life insurance. And we'll have our major companies like MetLife, Metropolitan Life, run by the Knights of Malta out of New York City, making a buku killing. So everything's going to be insured. Car insurance, life insurance, hand insurance. No, my sister, she's a court reporter. She's got insurance for her hands. She loses her hand, she has no business. So everything is insured. Everything. Going to have insurance for everything in the house. Going to write it all down so the insurance company can know everything you have in your house now. It's unending. And we're going to have death insurance so that when you die, they're going to pay a little premium so they can bury you. If you join the NRA, you're going to get $5,000, and that's just enough to put you in a casket and put you in the ground. Everything is insurance, everything is commerce, because everything an enemy does in an occupied territory is commerce for the benefit of the commander-in-chief. Therefore, he can be licensed and regulated by a myriad of regulations. That was page 42. Every enemy or ally of enemy insurance or reinsurance company and every enemy or ally of enemy doing business within the United States. Every enemy doing business within the United States through an agency or branch office or otherwise may, within 30 days after the passage of this act, apply to the President for a license to continue to do business. So now all the insurance companies are deemed enemies. MetLife, an enemy. Any other insurance companies you know of, they're all deemed enemies under Trading with the Enemy Act. They'll have to be licensed with a federal or state license. The President, Commander-in-Chief, runs it all for his benefit. And we'll continue on with this. Trading with the Enemy Act made applicable into the country. As we begin to, it was made applicable through Section 5B of the Act. So we'll review that after break here. And the news. So stay tuned with Eric John Phelps, 24/7, roll break. We're continuing on page 45 of our Trading with the Enemy Act in Section 1 of the middle volume. And here is the key provision of the Trading with the Enemy Act that will be amended on March 9th, 1933. This is the key provision of the Trading with the Enemy Act that will be amended on March 9th, 1933. So that the entire act will be made applicable to every person in the United States. That's every artificial entity, including all these artificial entity individuals with their surety private citizens. It'll be made applicable to them inside the United States on March 9th, 1933. But here in 1917, it's just fine. There's nothing wrong with it. So here we read Section 5, paragraph B in parentheses. Page 45, quote, that the President may investigate, regulate, or prohibit under such rules and regulations as he may prescribe, by means of licenses or otherwise, by means of licenses or otherwise. Well, that's an open-ended thing there, isn't it? Any transactions in foreign exchange, export, or earmarkings of gold, or silver coin, or bullion, or currency. Remember that word currency, because this is where FDR is going to stop as he quotes this in his Proclamation 2039. He's not going to continue on in his Proclamation 2039. And here's what it says. Transfers of credit in any form other than credits relating solely to transactions to be executed wholly within the United States. You see this? This little phrase here says that this provision of the Trading with the Enemy Act doesn't apply to credits, the transfers of credit relating solely to transactions to be executed wholly within the United States. So therefore, all the private citizens issuing credit and receiving credit and doing transactions inside the United States, this act doesn't apply to them. So there weren't any gold-fringed flags hanging up in the banks back then. It was de jure limited constitutional government. This phrase, other than credits relating solely to transactions to be executed wholly within the United States will be removed when this Section 5B is amended by the Emergency Banking Relief Act on March 9th, 1933. And when they remove this section, now all transfers of credit will be subject to the Trading with the Enemy Act. Well, I don't transfer credit. I just put my check in the post office, put my paycheck in the bank every week, and I'm not transferring credit. My friend, everything you do is credit. Credit is debt. The notes that we use are called Federal Reserve notes. They are debt notes. They are credit notes. The all-caps entity in which name we all carry on our business is a debtor. It's a debtor by status. That's why you can't be surety for it. It's another reason you must become a private citizen. If we're going to obey Romans chapter 14, owe no man anything? We can't be a debtor by status. So that's what they're going to do. On March 9th, they're going to eliminate that phrase. But with the phrase here in 1917, it's just fine. Trading with the Enemy Act doesn't apply to transactions wholly executed within the United States. But when they take the gold, there'll be no more money. When they take all the gold out of circulation by May 1st, 1933, all that is left is credit. So therefore, all that's going on inside the country is mere transfers of credit. That's why everybody has in their account what's called credit on account. Nobody has any money on account. And that's why when my checks are endorsed, when people give me checks, it's always a qualified endorsement, and it says on special deposit. On special deposit for money on account, not credit on account, for money on account or exchange for non-redeemable Federal Reserve notes. Get yourself a stamp and then have on special deposit, all capital letters, and then underneath that, smaller letters, for money on account or, next line, exchange for non-redeemable, that's the next line, Federal Reserve notes, that's the next line. So therefore, every deposit that's made into your special and private special account is for money on account, not for credit on account. It's on special deposit. It's a trust. And you're expecting a future return of your interest. As a private citizen, you do everything by way of trust. Trust, 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 trust. Everything you touch is a trust. Set up a trust with your mouth, with your words, with a signature, with an endorsement, whatever. Everything is trust. You operate by way of trust in everything. Private equity trust. So here, they're going to amend this particular portion of the Trading with the Enemy Act and make it applicable, thereby make the whole act applicable to every person, quote unquote, subject to the jurisdiction of the United States under the Emergency Banking Relief Act. Section 6 on page 46, Section 6, page 46. That the President is authorized to appoint the duties of and fix a salary not to exceed $5,000 per annum of an official to be known as the alien property custodian, who shall be empowered to receive all money and property in the United States due or belonging to an enemy. Now, what happens when you make everybody in the United States under military occupation, when you make them all enemies? What does that do to their property? Why, it makes their property the property of the commander-in-chief, but now it's in trust to the alien property custodian, which office was done away with in 1966 under LBJ. And so now the alien property custodian is the Secretary of the Treasury. He has all that responsibility. All the property in the United States is held in trust by the Secretary of the Treasury, including you. It's held in trust. Your registered property. You've been seized. The all caps entity of which is an enemy of which you are property of, is now being held in trust by the Secretary of Treasury for the benefit of the Commander-in-Chief. Because you're surety for the all caps name that was seized. So therefore, all the property that you enjoy, all the books of my library, of my computer, all of it, my clothes on my back, all the property that I touch, the land that I live on, all belongs to the Commander-in-Chief and is in trust to his alien property custodian, the Secretary of Treasury, for the use of the Commander-in-Chief, which must be pursuant to public policy, because to be pursuant to public policy, the property must be devoted by the owner for public usages. And so therefore, public policy governs everything. Socialist communism of the Commander-in-Chief, leveling everybody. Cromwell in his days, they were called levelers. Roman equity levels everybody. English American equity does not level everybody, because it's limited by the common law. We go on. So all the property of the enemy, of the all caps enemy, belongs to the government, the federal government. It's just registered on a state level. That's all. That includes your car title, your certificate of title. You get a certificate, homie, but the title is held on a state level. All property is registered on a state level. But it's been seized by the Commander-in-Chief, and the states merely keep track of his received, seized property for him. They're Toby's. And by the way, that was made possible by the 14th Amendment when the states were submitted to the Washington, D.C. When citizenship was made, U.S. citizenship of the United States was made primary, and state citizenship was made a privilege thereof. Thereby it made the states subordinate to Washington, D.C. That's why you see the American flag fly atop of the flagpole and the smaller state flag beneath it. The states are merely the property trustees, keeping track of all the property, all the bank accounts, all the money in the bank accounts for the benefit of the Secretary of Treasury, as the Secretary of Treasury sends its internal revenue agents out to keep tabs of it, because it doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the Secretary of the Treasury. The Secretary of Treasury regulates everything the IRS does because it's his agency to do his bidding as validated by the Emergency Banking Relief Act. You with me? Continuing on. That was page 46. We go on. Page 50. Page 50. Bottom of the page. Any payment, conveyance, transfer, assignment, or delivery of money. Remember, there's money in circulation now. Gold and silver is in circulation, so there's money. Everything else is credit. Delivery of money or property made to the alien property custodian hereinafter shall be a full acquittance and discharge for all purposes of the obligation of the person making the same to the extent of the same. Well, let me translate that for you. Any payment, conveyance, namely conveyance, or transfer, or assignment, or delivery of money or property to the alien property custodian, now the Secretary of Treasury, hereunder, shall be a full acquittance and discharge for all purposes of the obligation. We're going to discharge obligations here. And after 1933, namely after they take the gold, that's all that's going to be done. Discharging obligations, and that's the very language that you have in the House Joint Resolution 192. Discharging obligations. There's no payment of debt. Because there really is no debt. To have real debt, you have to have real money. All you have is obligations. And the discharging of obligations. Every time you write a check out of your account, you're going to supposedly pay a bill. You're not paying a bill. You're discharging an obligation. You can't pay anything with a debt note. You're playing a game of musical chairs. Discharging obligations. No debts get paid. The debt gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Or the obligations, I should say, get bigger and bigger and bigger. And any tyrant loves to have a huge obligation load, debt load, saddled upon the people that he rules, because it renders them incapable of resisting his absolute divine right and military power. You see why the military government doesn't want to get rid of debt or obligations? Do you see why it likes it? Do you see why the Iraqi war is what, $9 million a day? They like it. More obligations put upon the persons, the all caps name, for which all the people are sureties, held in a voluntary servitude. It's not involuntary, it's voluntary. So there's no breach of the 13th Amendment here. They did everything in the law. So, if you convey property to the Secretary of Treasury, it shall be considered a full acquittance and discharge of the obligation that the all caps might have, to the extent of the obligation. And that's how we're going to deal with IRS liens. We'll deal with that topic later on, but this is the foundation for it. And in Trading with the Enemy Act, it's looking forward to the day when all there will be is credit. All there will be is obligations to be discharged. That day will come in 1933, really after HJR 192, when they suspend all payments in gold for contracts. Okay? So all there is discharge of obligations. So we live in a fictional world of an orgy of debt obligations flying everywhere. It's all paper. There's no substance at all to it. This is all on what you would call the public side of the ledger, the public created by FDR, where everything's a fiction. The money is a fiction. The people are fictions. Everything is fiction. It's artificial. And it has nothing to do with God or the Bible. It's completely and totally anti-Christ. It is evil. And we're guilty because we voluntarily participate in it. It goes on. Page 54, this is important here now, because you want to remember that all the property held in trust by the alien property custodian, and now the Secretary of Treasury, is untouchable. It's untouchable. It's absolutely secured. Because this is going to be the foundation for the commander-in-chief to wage his crusades and to impose radical socialist communism democracy in this country. We read on page 54. Except as herein provided, the money or other property conveyed, transferred, assigned, delivered, or paid to the alien property custodian, now the Secretary of Treasury, shall not be liable to lien, attachment, garnishment, trustee process, or execution, or subject to any order or decree of any court. This property held in trust by the Secretary of Treasury is untouchable. because it's the heart and soul. It's the economic heart and soul of what the Jesuits will use to build this empire and wage war. One of the ladies that took my course worked for the FBI for 30 years, and she said, through my research investigation in the Bureau, I found out that the birth certificate was the foundation for everything going on Wall Street. And I was told by my superiors that you're not going to talk about this because if you do, we're going to involve you in litigation and we're going to destroy you financially. That's the post-fornicating bastards and inquisitors known as the FBI. The high command, at least. So we're going to go on here. Now we have the first mention of U.S. citizen in the sideline. U.S. citizen may obtain license to use enemy patent. There's no term U.S. citizen used in this act, but now the big bankers here of the big trust company in New York, they're starting to introduce this term U.S. citizen back in 1917. It will not be used in any statutes before 1933, to my knowledge. But they want to get the people acclimated to this term, U.S. citizen. U.S. citizen. Okay? A private citizen is not a U.S. citizen. And he's never referred to as a U.S. citizen. It goes on. It says on page 56, paragraph F. It talks about a bill in equity after the end of the war. Suits in equity. This is why we want to have bills in equity. This whole concept springs from the Trading with the Enemy Act of having a bill in equity. We want a full accounting of our property that's been held by the Secretary of Treasury for these years, and we want a full accounting because you know what? We're the beneficiaries, the private citizen, and it's ours. And we want a full accounting by the judge in chambers. And all he has to do is give the order to his clerk there, or whoever, and they can do a full accounting in a couple of days, maybe shorter than that. The question is, will they? Will you be brought into chambers as the private citizen? Will they give you a full accounting? Will they protect you? Will they? Will they obey the law? That's the question. Going on, page 58. Section 12 on page 58. That all monies, including checks and drafts payable on demand, paid to or received by the alien property custodian, pursuant to this act, shall be deposited forthwith in the Treasury of the United States and may be invested and reinvested, and I will add reinvested and reinvested, by the Secretary of the Treasury in United States bonds or United States certificates of indebtedness under such rules and regulations as the President shall prescribe for each deposit, investment, and sale of securities. My. You realize your birth certificate's a security? Do you realize they're bought and sold on Wall Street every day in bundles? Did you know that? And what gives those birth certificate securities value is the fact that you're surety for it. You're the registered property of it. And when you cease to be its property, you cease to be its surety, do those birth certificates then represent any property? Do they represent you anymore? No. Do they have any value? No. So therefore, do you think this military government's going to go along with this? Well, if they're going to obey the law, they have to acknowledge your private citizenship status, and therefore they have to acknowledge the fact that that birth certificate's no longer a security because it doesn't represent any property they can trade. So therefore, the government's going to have to be a security because these things aren't going away. We read in Revelation 18 that these merchants of the earth trade in the souls of men. How do they do that? Through birth certificates. So these things can be invested and reinvested and reinvested and reinvested, and the government make buku money, of which it takes a certain percentage for its use, and builds its military-industrial complex and imposes communism. It goes on. Next paragraphs. Banks may act as depositaries for custodian, also Secretary of Treasury. All other property of an enemy or ally of enemy, conveyed, transferred, assigned, delivered, or paid to the alien property custodian, now the Secretary of Treasury, hereunder, shall be safely held and administered by him, Secretary of Treasury, except as hereinafter provided. And the President is authorized to designate a deposit as a depositary or depositaries of property of an enemy or ally of enemy. Any bank, the President is authorized to designate as a depositary any bank or banks or trust company or trust companies or other suitable depositary or depositaries located and doing business in the United States. Do you know who keeps this property of the enemy that's transferred to the Secretary of Treasury? The big banks. What's a depositary? A depositary, according to Black's Fifth, on page 58A, says, the party or institution, bank or trust company, receiving a deposit. One with whom anything is lodged in trust as depository is the place where it is put. A trustee, fiduciary. This term should not be confused with depository, which is the physical place of deposit. The depository, the place where a deposit is placed and kept. Bank, trust company. Place where something is deposited or stored as for the safekeeping or convenience. But the depositary is the party of the institution, the company. Who are these big banks? Do you think Bank of America might be one of them? Do you think Wells Fargo might be one of them? Do you think J.P. Morgan Chase might be one of them? Do you think the Class A stockholders of the Federal Reserve Bank, do you think those banks are these depositaries? I think so, because that's why they're too big to fail. That's why they were, quote-unquote, bailed out in 2008. All these are the depositaries holding all the property of the enemies in the United States, and they're not about to fail. In fact, they're going to make a killing in the quote-unquote bailout. And according to Karen Hudis, who I think some things she has said is very important, she says that the Bank of International Settlements, I believe, has $4 quadrillion. That's quadrillion. That's more, that's first million, then billion, then trillion, then quadrillion. What the assets that are privately held are monstrous, while in the public everything is massive debt obligations. And if you're surety for this all caps named debtor, you then are liable for these massive obligations. That's why Solomon wrote in Proverbs 11:15, whosoever is surety for a stranger shall smart for it. You're going to hurt for it. We're hurting. We're being decimated by the Knights Templar, Jesuit order, High Masonic, Roman hierarchy, Knights of Malta, Equestrian order, big banker gangsters that are gigatrillionaires while we are scrounging for pennies, trying to make ends meet. And it's all our fault because we consented to this. So do you see why the depositaries are important? These big banks can't fail. We'll read a couple more things out of Trading with the Enemy Act. After break here. After station identification here at 24/7 World Radio with Brother Eric John Phelps.
World Radio.
Phelps back with the Trading with the Enemy Act here in our middle volume, section 1, page 59. Continuing on with the alien property custodian, which is now the Secretary of the Treasury as of 1966. The alien property custodian shall be vested with all of the powers of a common law trustee. You see why the Secretary of Treasury is trustee and the Commander-in-Chief is beneficiary. He's the sovereign after March 9th, 1933. Pardon me. Should be a common law trustee in respect of all property other than money. Why would he say that? Because one day all the money will be taken out of circulation. Remember, J.P. Morgan once said, gold is money and everything else is credit. So therefore, when the day would come when all the gold would be taken out of circulation as a socialist, communist, Nazi May 1st day. Remember, the Nazis celebrated May 1st too. Remember, Joseph Stalin and Adolf Hitler knew each other. They walked the grounds of Schönberg Castle there in Austria, the Habsburgs, in 1912 or so. They knew each other. They worked together for the entire duration of World War II. Hitler and Stalin were in the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. They divided Poland in 1939. Hitler invades on October 1st. September 1st. Stalin invades September 17th from the east. They divide Poland in half, kill all the Polish nationals. There was the Soviets, the Czech shoots the Polish national man, the manhood of Poland, shoots him in the back of the head, kills in excess of probably 10,000 in Katyn Forest. Stalin and Hitler worked together, and the Germans were blamed for that when later it was admitted by the Soviets that, yeah, we did it. Because we got to make universal hatred for the German people everywhere. That every German's evil, right? When it was the Germans, by the grace of God, that gave us the Protestant Reformation, that gave us the first one of the first political liberties in Europe after Geneva. Geneva is not far from Germany. I mean, it's south of Germany. It's still the Saxon race. Geneva with Calvin in it, the Frenchman, thank God. But again, going back to this, you have the alien property custodian shall be vested with the powers of a common law trustee in respect of all property other than money, which shall come into his possession in pursuance of the provisions of this act. All the property of the aliens and the enemies that come in to the act. Remember, the alien property custodian is the enemy property custodian. So an alien and an enemy are synonymous terms. Alien and enemy are synonymous terms. So therefore, the courts that are military courts with military jurisdiction are courts for aliens and enemies in substance. That's why the jurisdiction of every federal and state court to the private citizen is an alien and foreign jurisdiction. Okay? Making sense to you now? It's a jurisdiction that springs from Section 17, which I'm going to read to you shortly, of the Trading with the Enemy Act. Every court is a military court, trying aliens and enemies within a military due process of law, and everybody going to jail is a prisoner of war. Since March 9th, since April 25th, 1938. Notice here, shall come into the possession in pursuance of the provisions of this act, and acting under the supervision and direction of the President, and under such rules and regulations as the President shall prescribe, may manage such property. Oh my. Now the Secretary of Treasury, once the alien property custodian, now Secretary of Treasury, may manage such property and do any act or things in respect thereof, or make any disposition thereof, or of any part thereof, by sale or otherwise, and exercise, get that, the Secretary of Treasury can sell the property of the alien and the enemy. Is it possible that the Secretary of Treasury in this country has sold the land of this country to China? Is it possible? Under this act, it's entirely possible. Any property belonging to enemies under this act, which are aliens also, look what it says. This alien property custodian, who is now the Secretary of Treasury since 1966, may manage such property and make any disposition thereof. He may dispose of it. Other than the money. Can't touch the money, but the property he can. The money they can't do this with. Or the real money, because the real money is in private and being held by the commander-in-chief as collateral. The gold is held by his Federal Reserve Bank. It's still the gold that belongs to the people, but he seized it during this temporary state of national emergency by May 1st, 1933. So it's still our gold, but it's for his use. And it's being held in trust by his Secretary of Treasury. Right? And we don't have title to it because we're surety for this all caps name, which is also in trust. Trust property of the Commander-in-Chief. It goes on here and says, disposition thereof, or of any part thereof, by sale or otherwise. He can dispose of this property or any part of it by sale or otherwise. The Secretary of Treasury, overseen by the Commander-in-Chief, can sell the property of the aliens and the enemies of this country. So why should we be surprised when 50 square miles has been sold to China and Japan or whatever in the state of Idaho, where they can bring in all these Asians there, and they can have their own little country in the state of Idaho? That's what they've done by making the Trading with the Enemy Act applicable inside the United States. Is your blood boiling yet? It says, and exercise any rights which may be or become appurtenant thereto, appurtenant to that property, or to the ownership thereof, if and when necessary to prevent waste or to protect such property. Get this, to prevent waste or protect such property. They're going to use this very same wording that's been used in Gibson's Suits and Chancery. I'll read it to you in a minute. To prevent waste or to protect such property, and to the end that the interests of the United States in such property and rights, that the interests of the United States in such property and rights, or of such person as may ultimately become entitled thereto. Who is that? The person as may ultimately become entitled to this property, or to the proceeds thereof, all the money that's been made, all the proceeds, not money, they're saying proceeds, because there's not going to be money in circulation after 1933, may be preserved and safeguarded. Notice, and when necessary to prevent waste or to protect such property, as named above, and to the end that the interests of the United States in such property and rights, or of such person as may ultimately become entitled thereto, or to the proceeds thereof, may be preserved and safeguarded. This government is preserving and safeguarding your interest of the private citizen because you're the one ultimately entitled thereto. They have not touched this trust property. Now I just said, well, they can take it and sell it. No. Here it says that they can prevent waste, they can dispose of it or whatever, but they're going to preserve your interest in this property, the person that may become entitled thereto. And that's why when we get a bill in equity, which we're looking forward to, we want a full accounting, a marshaling of assets, and a full accounting by the court, by the chancellor, of all this that we're entitled thereto because we've shown up. We're now in chambers, and we're before the chancellor, and he now is trustee, and we're now beneficiary. We're one of we the people. He sees us like that, and now he can give us a full accounting. according to this act. Our property is being preserved for us in our interest. It's being managed for us. It's being administrated for us. When are we going to show up? I want to show up as soon as possible. I'm working on it hard to get 3 more pieces of evidence, and I'm going to file my complaint and bill in equity in federal district court in Harrisburg. See what happens. Trust God about it. Now notice here we have on page 59A a treatise or Suits in Chancery by Henry Gibson. Notice what he says here. Remember, the Secretary of Treasury is the receiver of the property of the alien and the enemy. Well, here we have maxims for receivers. Page 59B, under Suits in Chancery. Section 891 of Suits in Chancery, Office of a Receiver. A receiver is a person appointed by the court. A receiver is appointed for the benefit of the interested party. Who's that? That's you, the private citizen. Secretary of Treasury's receiver. We're talking about principles here, okay? Who makes the application, and for the benefit of all others who may eventually be found to have an interest in the property or its proceeds. Okay? The appointment is made for the benefit of the party who may ultimately appear to be entitled to the property or its proceeds. Is that not the very language of the Trading with the Enemy Act? And this was written 10 years before the Trading with the Enemy Act. This is 1907. Trading with the Enemy Act is 1917. They're holding it for you, and it's untouchable. It can't be liened, remember. It can't be subject to the decree of any court, including a world court. Of what a receiver may be appointed, page 59C. Section 893. It may be appointed over trust property of all kinds. Remember, all the property of the alien and the enemy is being held in trust by the Secretary of Treasury for the benefit of the one ultimately entitled thereto. That's you, as the private citizen. Our last little section in the Trading with the Enemy Act here on page 62, section 17. Now they're going to use the term United States District Courts. So this is a first usage of this phrase, United States District Courts. Like the first usage of the phrase, U.S. citizen. This is all prior to 1933 now, but they want to acclimate you to the use of this phrase, United States District Courts. Because everything with United States in front of it is the property of the Commander-in-Chief. U.S. citizen, U.S. District Court, U.S. person, U.S. Constitution. So they want to acclimate you. Every time you come in and out of the country, you go through customs. What do you go through? U.S. citizens in this line over here. U.S. citizens, U.S. citizens. Well, I'm not a U.S. citizen. What are you? I'm a private citizen, American national, Section 1 of the 14th Amendment. Go on. Section 17 on page 62 here in Section 1. That the district courts of the United States, notice it didn't say United States District Courts. It said the district courts of the United States. This is the old de jure title of the federal courts. That the district courts of the United States are hereby given jurisdiction. What kind of jurisdiction is this? Well, what kind of statute is this? This is a war power statute. This is a war statute that was enacted during World War I. And so, therefore, the jurisdiction that is being conferred on the district courts of the United States is a war jurisdiction. It is a military jurisdiction. And Dr. Eugene Schroeder makes it very clear in my DVD that I include with Book 3. This is military jurisdiction. And he made his great DVD in 1994. Are hereby given jurisdiction to make and enter all such rules as to notice and otherwise. notice and otherwise. Remember, jurisdiction of a court is conferred upon notice. So now we're going to have a special notice. It's going to be a military notice. And otherwise. And all such orders and decrees. Orders come from courts of law. Decrees come from courts of equity. Okay? All such orders and decrees, and to issue such process as may be necessary and proper in the premises to enforce the provisions of this act with a right of appeal from the final order or decree of such court as provided in sections 128 and 238 of the Act of March 3rd, 1911, entitled An Act to Codify, Revise, and Amend the Laws Relating to the Judiciary. Okay, so they're already preparing for this day. Codifying, revising laws relating to the judiciary. And it relates to Section 17 of the Trading with the Enemy Act. And this Section 17 confers a military jurisdiction on the district courts of the United States for the enforcement of this act over aliens and enemies. This is a jurisdiction for aliens and enemies conferred by Section 17 of the Trading with the Enemy Act. This is the jurisdiction of every federal district court today. This is the jurisdiction of every state, county, appellate, and Supreme Court of every state in this country. This is the jurisdiction of every federal district court, every circuit court, and the Supreme Court of the United States. It's all military jurisdiction under Section 17 of the Trading with the Enemy Act, because that's the Constitution of America today. The Trading with the Enemy Act is amended by the Emergency Banking Relief Act of March 9th, 1933. These two statutes rule everything. And these two statutes have been rendered untouchable by the Senate in 1976 or 73. Get to that in a little bit. But notice here it says, it shall, and such orders and decrees, and to issue such process as may be necessary and proper in the premises to enforce the provisions of this act. So therefore it's now given the authority, the district courts of the United States are given the authority now to issue such process. And they're also given a jurisdiction to make and enter all such rules as to notice and otherwise. When the Erie decision came out on April 25th, 1938, the same day that U.S. versus Carolyn Products was handed down, doing away with your unlimited common law right to contract, immediately, with no civilian due process anymore, this provision took over, and it's now a military due process. It's now, and the rules that would govern military due process in civil matters were called the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure. Do you know when they were enacted? These two decisions that I just mentioned to you on April 25th, 1938, were handed down in April. In September, the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure were promulgated. That's right. In 1942, the criminal rules, the Federal Rules of Criminal Procedure will be promulgated. But they first did civil, and then later criminal. 4 years later, criminal. This all springs, all these rules come from the Section 17 of Trading with the Enemy Act. So that's why every courtroom that you walk into has a flag trimmed with gold fringe. Now, page 72, Office of the Alien Property Custodian. We read, second paragraph, World War I. The size of the assets the custodian controlled only became clear over the next year. Late in 1918, Palmer, this man that was the head of it, this criminal, Palmer reported he was managing almost 30,000 trusts with assets worth $500 million. It's $500 million. Back in 1918, that was gold and silver $500 million. He estimated that another 9,000 trusts worth $300 million awaited evaluation. This was becoming huge. These assets of the aliens and enemies were becoming huge. And do you think the Jesuits running the government back under Woodrow Wilson, do you think they had any intention of giving up these assets? Remember what Wiley said in the History of Protestantism, that the Jesuits were told that all the wealth of the world would be theirs. All of it, if they would but obey Ignatius Loyola. World War II, page 73. On 11th March 1942, President Franklin D. Roosevelt issued Executive Order 1995 establishing the Office of the Alien Property Custodian as an independent agency under his direct authority. That's right, because you see, the man who controlled FDR was Jesuit Edmund Walsh. So Jesuit Edmund Walsh really had power over the Alien Property Custodian in 1942. Those Jesuits are going to be all over that property. Then it goes on down and says, he appointed Leo Crowley, a former banker and chair of the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, as alien property custodian. During the war, the alien property custodian amassed a vast portfolio of enemy property, including real estate, business enterprises, see, land and business, ships and intellectual property in the form of trademarks, copyrights, patents, and pending patent applications. Remember, everything, when you go to the patent office to get a patent for whatever you do, you're doing it as an enemy. And the patent belongs to the government of the United States. And you have its use. On May 13, 1966, President Lyndon B. Johnson issued Executive Order 11281, which abolished the office effective June 30th of that year. And as a result, all the money and property in the United States due or belonging to an enemy for the care and administration of the property and property rights of enemies was committed to the Secretary of the Treasury. Secretary of the Treasury was now in charge of it all. We see on page 76, 75, Executive Order 11281. So May 13, 1966, it essentially tells us that whereas in the interest of efficiency, it is desirable to return to the Secretary of the Treasury jurisdiction over the property and interests remaining subject to such blocking controls. So the Trading with the Enemy Act, all the property gotten from there was now subject to the Secretary of the Treasury. Page 76, the Secretary of the Treasury shall hereafter be responsible for the administration of the controls exercisable under Executive Order 83 and 89. And so the Secretary of the Treasury is all-powerful over all economics in this country today. Because everything in this country is deemed enemy property, and therefore under the control of the Secretary of the Treasury, for the benefit of the Commander-in-Chief, to wage war for the benefit of the Pope of Rome. That's why we need to become private citizens. That's why we need to return to becoming citizens of the United States under Section 1 of the 14th Amendment, with the protection of a civilian due process of law on federal and state levels, and with the right for a full accounting of all the assets and property acquired in our interest during the last 82 years during this temporary state of national emergency. Don't you think that's fair? Don't you think you're entitled to that? I think you are. And so we must do something about it. So take my course. Call me. 610-340-0734. 610-589-5300. Call me up. The course is going to be next weekend for 3 days, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. So give me a call. Take the course. You get the books. You can re-listen to these audios. And I trust that you shall become a private citizen under the protection of Section 1 of the 14th Amendment. May the Lord bless you as you seek to do His will according to His word, the AV 1611 Reformation Bible, which states in Proverbs 11:15, whosoever is surety for a stranger shall surely smart for it. Whosoever hateth surety shall be sure. That's us. That's those of us who've been saved by the grace of God, know Christ as our Savior, have truly repented of our sins, believe the gospel that He died for our sins, was buried and rose again, and we await from heaven our Savior, who shall change our lowly body into a body like His glorious body, that when we see Him, we shall see Him as He is, because we shall be like Him. Until Monday, may the Lord bless you. Have a good Lord's Day. Maranatha.